If you filled up your tank this week, the number on the pump is higher than it has been in nearly 4 years. The average American driver is now paying roughly $600 more per year to own the same car, drive the same miles, and work the same job they had 6 weeks ago. For a 2-driver household, the figure is closer to $1,200. None of that money is buying more gasoline. It is buying the same gasoline at a higher price. The pressure does not stop at the pump. Diesel, the fuel that moves nearly every good on a grocery store shelf, is within striking distance of its all-time record. When diesel climbs, the cost of shipping climbs with it, and eventually so does the cost of everything a truck carries. On March 31st, 2026, the national average for a gallon of regular gasoline crossed $4 for the first time since August of 2022. The American Automobile Association's official acknowledgement came 2 days later, on April 2nd, when the national average stood at $4.08. The association stated that the day's average was 10 cents higher than the prior week and $1.08 higher than the prior month, and that crude oil prices had surged past $100 per barrel as conflict in the Middle East continued. The Associated Press and the Washington Post described that monthly move as the largest on record. GasBuddy recorded a 30-day increase of $1.05 per gallon and called it the largest monthly increase ever recorded by the company. A week later, on April 9th, the national average peaked at $4.16. The warnings were on the record before the spike reached its peak. On March 26th, 5 days before the $4 threshold was crossed, the American Automobile Association told the public that the national average was up $1 from the prior month and stated that it could reach $4 per gallon in the coming days. Patrick DeHaan, head of petroleum analysis at GasBuddy, went further. In an April 2nd interview with the Consumer News and Business Channel, DeHaan said that gas prices could conceivably hit record levels of $5 per gallon if nobody acted to clear the bottleneck in the Strait of Hormuz, and described the situation as a race against time. On March 31st, he said that the price shock was going to quickly ignite additional inflation, that it would mean more expensive bills for truckers, tractors, and trains, and that consumers were likely to be greeted by rising grocery prices. Christopher Rupke, chief economist at Forward Bonds, put it in longer historical terms on April 10th, saying that every recession since the 1970s had been preceded by an energy price shock, and that if consumers thought there was a cost of living crisis before, they had not seen anything yet. Most of the supply-side decisions behind this story were made long before March. Valero Energy filed formal notice with the California Energy Commission in April of 2025 of its intent to cease operations at its Benicia, California refinery, a facility with a capacity of 145,000 barrels per day. Power down activities began earlier in 2026, and the facility is targeted to be fully idle by the end of April. Valero recorded a $1.1 billion impairment charge tied to Benicia and its Wilmington facility, and approximately 400 workers are affected. Phillips 66 had already completed the closure of its Los Angeles refinery in the fourth quarter of 2025, a 139,000 barrel per day facility. On April 3, 2026, 2 days after the national average crossed $4, Phillips 66 terminated an additional 122 employees at the Los Angeles site. On April 8th, ExxonMobil announced major overhauls at its Beaumont, Texas refinery, the third largest refinery in the United States, with a capacity of 612,000 barrels per day. On April 10th, a fire broke out at Marathon Petroleum's El Paso refinery, a 133,000 barrel per day facility. The fire was contained, and there were no injuries. Since March 19th, roughly 800 United Steelworkers members have been locked out of British Petroleum's Whiting, Indiana refinery, the largest refinery in the Midwest, with a capacity of 440,000 barrels per day. As of April 11th, that lockout has continued into its fourth week. A refinery is a place where crude oil is turned into usable gasoline and diesel. When a refinery shuts down, the supply of finished fuel tightens. When supply tightens while demand stays the same, the price at the pump rises. The Phillips 66 Los Angeles closure and the Valero Benicia closure together remove approximately 284,000 barrels per day of refining capacity, roughly 17% of California's total, according to the Energy Information Administration. That capacity is not coming back. California gasoline on April 10th averaged $5.91.6 per gallon. California diesel on the same day averaged $7.72.7 per gallon. These are the prices a California family pays to commute to work, and the prices a California trucker pays to deliver food. The British Petroleum Whiting lockout sits directly upstream of the fuel supply for states across the middle of the country. Each event on its own is a constraint on supply. Stacked together, during a period when crude oil is already trading above $100 per barrel, they translate directly into the $4+ national average that drivers are now paying. The pattern matters more than any single event. According to the Energy Information Administration, at least 11 to 12 United States refineries have closed or been converted since 2019. United States refining capacity peaked at 19 million barrels per day at the start of 2020. After the Phillips 66 Los Angeles and Valero Benicia closures, effective capacity in April 2026 is estimated at approximately 17.8 to 17.9 million barrels per day. That is more than 1 million barrels per day of refining capacity lost from the peak. California refineries alone have declined from roughly 23 in the year 2000 to 14 at the start of 2024 and are expected to drop to roughly 11 by the end of 2026. After Benicia closes, 3 companies will control more than 90% of California's gasoline refining capacity. The April 2026 price spike is what that long trend looks like when it collides with a supply shock. The effect on middle-class households is measurable. The average American driver covers roughly 15,000 miles per year at roughly 28 miles per gallon, which works out to approximately 536 gallons of gasoline annually. At the pre-crisis baseline of $2.98 per gallon, that translated to a fuel bill of roughly $1,600 per driver per year. At $4.15 per gallon, that same driver now pays approximately $2,200 per year. The spike has cost the average American driver an extra $600 a year. For a 2-driver household, the figure is closer to $1,200. Every 10-cent increase at the pump adds roughly $53.60 to an individual driver's annual fuel bill. That money is not going into savings, or rent, or groceries, or a mortgage payment. It is being absorbed at the pump. Because diesel is the fuel that moves goods, the cost of everything that arrives by truck carries the same pressure forward. The March Consumer Price Index release, issued on April 10th, showed 3.3% year-over-year inflation, up from 2.4% in February, with a 0.9% monthly increase, the largest monthly inflation jump in 4 years, driven primarily, according to the reporting, by gas prices. The smaller details do not usually make national headlines, but they land on the same households. At a Sunoco station at Walnut and 22nd Streets in Philadelphia, a customer named Mignon Adams was charged $150 for what should have been a roughly $28 fill-up after a scammer left the pump transaction open. Another victim at the same station reported a $75 unauthorized charge. In Lower Merion Township outside Philadelphia, some victims reported charges as high as $165. When prices are higher, each scam attempt yields more money. Indiana saw its monthly gasoline sales tax recalculate upward on April 1st to 17.2 cents per gallon, up 2.1 cents from March, pushing total state and federal taxes to roughly 72 cents per gallon. That recalculation happened automatically, triggered by the higher pre-tax price. As of April 11, 2026, the national average has come down slightly from its April 9th peak to $4.13.5, the second consecutive day of declines. That is still $1.15.5 above the pre-crisis baseline from late February. The British Petroleum Whiting lockout is ongoing. Valero Benicia is still powering down. Phillips 66, Los Angeles is permanently closed. The refining capacity that the United States has lost since 2020 has not been replaced. The pressure on household budgets that built up over the last 6 weeks is not expected by any of the analysts on the record to unwind quickly.